Today, on the Second Wave Survival Series, I'll be talking with my colleague and really good friend, Dr. Terry Wahls. She's the author of the Wahls Protocol, and she has a new version out, revised and expanded with tons of new information, and she's going to be sharing all the new stuff that's gone into the revisions in her protocol, latest updates on research, and we dive into a lot about her story, how she had, prodromal symptoms, things coming on that in her early 20s that suggested she may have MS. And then she had the onset in her 40s, and we really get to track through her personal life, her medical story. I've learned, I know Terry pretty well, but I learned so much more about her today, and I'm really excited to be able to bring this interview to you. If you're a patient and you're someone who has MS or another autoimmune condition, she has great tips for you. If you do have MS and you'd like to participate in any of her ongoing trials, she has an invitation for you, so definitely stick around to the end to get that. Practitioners, Dr. Terry Wahls has over 90% adherence to her protocols in her clinical practice and in her studies. This is just a mind-blowing number. So if you want to learn tips and techniques and how you can learn from Terry so that you can have that kind of adherence to your protocols in your office, stick around because Dr. Terry Wahls is sharing that with us. And we do a little tangent on something called ApoE4, which is a really important gene to know about in your lipid metabolism and your cholesterol. So Terry tells us a little bit about how we can utilize that to fine-tune our diet, and also we talk a lot about how to prevent things like dementia and all autoimmune conditions, even those triggered by chronic infections. So hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check it out. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's awesome to see you again.
Oh, I love chatting. So this is good.
So, yeah, and this is a crazy time, and one of the things I feel is so, I'm trying to look for a silver lining, and one of those things is we have an opportunity to really educate people about, the aspects of health that they actually control. And when I think of someone who's been on the forefront of teaching that to the public in very actionable ways, you're the first person who comes to mind through all your work. So again, thanks so much for joining us. So for everybody,
it's really been a remarkable journey because I'm a professor of medicine, and so I was very skeptical of functional medicine, integrative medicine, the billions of dollars spent in complementary alternative medicine. And I was very much the newest drugs, latest technology kind of person. But God has a mysterious way of teaching us, and so I got to have a little redirection along the way.
So this is the part I'm always interested in hearing where you come from, and because I grew up in a similar model. And it's drugs and surgery, So what was that? What happened, and what got you to this point that you're on this mission?
Well, so in 2000, I started getting weakness in my left leg, started stumbling, got evaluated ultimately by a neurologist with MRIs of my brain and spinal cord, spinal taps, nerve conduction velocities, lots and lots of blood work. And they found one lesion in my brain, a couple lesions in my spinal cord, and said, you forgot to mention that 13 years ago you had an episode of dim vision. And so that was probably optic neuritis, and this is probably your second relapse, and you have relapse-remitting MS. And I said, well, what about my episodic face pains, my trigeminal neuralgia? So no, they're not related. Okay. So
right.
Now, in retrospect, those symptoms my face pain began during medical school in 1980, and they had become steadily worse. 7 years later, I had the dim vision, and then 13 years later, I had the weakness in my left leg. And so I knew, because I was reading this science, that the natural history of MS was progressive. And I certainly believe in the best technology, the best people. So I did some research and went to see the best people in the country, took the newest drugs, and went steadily downhill anyway. Fortunately, my neurology team mentioned the work of Lauren Credane. I read his books, his papers. And this is a big deal because I'd been a low-fat vegetarian for about 20 years.
Oh boy.
And so, after a lot of prayer and meditation, I went back to eating meat. I gave up all grain, all legumes, all dairy, big change in my diet. And I had to sort of ease back into meat because that was a tough transition. But I continued to decline. In the next year, I needed a two-recline wheelchair. I took now mitoxantrone. I continued to decline. Then I switched to Tysabri, the new biologic everyone was so excited about. I continued to decline. Then I was switched to other disease-modifying therapies and continued to relentlessly decline. It was very clear to me that the best drugs from the best people, the most aggressive treatment possible, was not stopping my march towards a bedridden life, a potentially demented life, and potentially intractable pain. Because I could clearly see that over the 20 years I've been having my trigeminal neuralgia, that was getting more frequent, more severe, and much more difficult to turn off.
Right. So you've got multiple sclerosis that's put you in a tilt reclined wheelchair, and all those fancy words that you threw out there for everyone are like really expensive, really potentially dangerous, and potentially life-saving drugs, but they're not working.
They're not working. And I want to tell everyone that, I read the package insert. I knew that I was accepting a 2% risk of leukemia every time I took mitoxantrone. But I was thrilled to take it because I didn't want to become bedridden, demented, have intractable pain.
It gave you the future possibility.
It gave me a possibility. And I knew that Tysabri, higher risk of infection, higher risk of cancers, higher risk of potentially even more profound disability due to infection. But I was thrilled to take Tysabri because it gave me hope. And it was very clear I had a very aggressive disease. And I understand why people take disease-modifying therapies, because you don't want to become as profoundly disabled as I had already become.
And I can't even imagine.
My slope downhill was very fast. So, and I had 2 young kids.
Oh my God.
Children were 8 and 5 at the time of diagnosis.
So you started having symptoms, you're saying, like in the 80s? Or
1980.
Yeah.
1980.
1980. And when did, and you got,
So I was about 21 when I started having symptoms.
Oh my God.
At 45, I had my diagnosis. And that 20-year lag of symptoms that people can't really explain, they can't satisfactorily treat, is very typical of serious systemic autoimmune disease.
Right.
That is very, very common. That you have an autoimmune problem, you see people who give you, do the best they can. You take drugs that are, continually more potent, but you continue to decline. And you keep seeing multiple docs. Typically it's 8 physicians, many tens of thousands of dollars, and 10 to 20 years to make your diagnosis.
What makes it so hard?
Well, in part because the big symptoms are fatigue.
Right.
You and I see that all the time in our primary care clinics. Fatigue, pain, some mental health changes, more anxiety, more depression, maybe some brain fog. Those are not very specific symptoms.
No, I mean, you just
across many disease states.
Right. You just described like a lot of the people that I see with chronic infections, chronic Lyme disease, or mold exposures. But now you're saying that could be the prodrome, the beginnings of MS as well.
It's the beginning of MS, and it's the same kind of symptoms that I saw in my conventional primary care clinic.
For stress.
Right. For all of their, like complicated issues that, I'm trying to treat symptomatically, and eventually there's enough organ damage that I figure out they have inflammatory bowel disease, or rheumatoid arthritis, or Hashimoto's, or in my case, MS, or anxiety, depression, or post-concussive headaches.
Right.
And it was through my own healing journey that I began to realize that for many, many, many folks with these non-specific complaints, what they're really dealing with is a prodrome of an autoimmune illness. And that you and I know that often one of the triggers for the autoimmune illness might be an infection, because infection is part of that issue. It might be the severe stress, and medical school is a little stressful.
Just a hair.
And then, of course, I was suddenly inside all of the time, and I believed that stuff that the sunlight would cause skin cancer, so I was using sunscreen. So my vitamin D levels had fallen very, very low. I wasn't sleepy, high levels of stress. And because I'm an artist, before getting into medical school, I was like so thrilled to be taking gross anatomy, Tom. Like,
that must have been amazing. Yeah.
This is amazing. So I probably have triple the formaldehyde exposure to my classmates, because I would do my dissections, and then for fun, I'd go back with my notebooks and I'd unwrap the cadavers, and I have these beautiful notebooks of the drawings I made of the cadavers.
Oh, no way.
So
cool.
And the year after, my face pain started. So are they connected? I don't know. The other trigger that I can comment on is, again, because I'm also an athlete. Before I entered medical school, I competed in Taekwondo, full contact free sparring, a kick 'em up sort of girl.
Nice.
And of course, that there was no protective gear really, and you got 2 points for kicking people in the head. 1 point for punching them in the chest. And so I was sort of intense, and I competed nationally, and
oh my goodness.
I did have several concussions, particularly a fairly significant concussion where I was really quite dazed and had severe headaches for a while following, and that was at the Pan American Trials. It was a thrilling competition.
Oh my God.
And now, as I read the literature on concussions and subsequent risk of MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, again, thinking that 2 years later, that's, when I started having my symptoms. So there were probably, for me, many potential triggers. The vitamin D, I think the stress, the formaldehyde, and of course my concussions.
Yeah, and I think that this is kind of a common story, because it's like, I mean, I've had concussions. I was actually an anatomy teaching fellow, so I went back and did anatomy voluntarily again and taught it. And I think that what you see is that people still have, like, stuff happens in our normal lives, and then we have these other things on top of it.
Yeah, I think another way of thinking about this is, how much resilience do we have? How much reserve do we have? So yes, we and the younger you are, we have more resilience to these stressful events.
And we think we do, because we use that resilience up pretty quickly when we're young, and we're more aware of it now.
And so, and then once it happens, you have lost your reserve for your detox, for your hormonal balance, for your recovery after the concussions. Now damage can accelerate.
Right.
And so medical school is when I lost my resilience.
So one of the things that I've been talking about a lot lately, and really kind of the focus of the podcast, is about sort of this notion of the second wave and being able to survive the second wave. And I know that we talk about it with COVID-19, but more importantly, I think of it as like when I'm kayaking, if you roll in the surf, there's always another thing coming. There's another wave coming. And like when I hear you speaking here, it's like to say the resilience is something that we should be sort of honoring and supporting earlier on, so that no matter what is the next thing to come down the road, we have a better chance. So how do we do that? I mean, like, and where does that go in your story?
So what I learned for my own healing journey, and then ultimately I learned for my practice, was when I had the sort of aha moment, like, well, I'm reading the basic science. I at first focused on supplements, and actually, I very first focused on drugs. And fortunately, I figured out like, this is crazy. They're not helping. I can't access the experimental drugs anyway. So I had to read about something I could access. So I went down supplements, figured out that a supplement cocktail slowed my decline, but didn't recover me.
Okay.
Unfortunately, then I began to get another aha, like, I really ought to just focus on creating health, as much health as I can. That'll maybe slow things down. Because at this point, Tom, I have no expectation of recovery because I understand, and my neurologists have all told me, and my primary care doctor has said, you have secondary progressive MS. Recovery doesn't happen. Functions once lost are gone forever. So the goal is to try and slow decline as much as you can. So I'm taking drugs that cost many thousands of dollars every month that have the risk of killing me. I'm thrilled to take them because I'm trying to slow my decline.
But
Unfortunately, I began to read the research about creating health. And now I did do some things right from the beginning, and that is exercise. I had known from the very first day I was diagnosed that I would have to keep exercising as much as I could to maintain my strength. My neurologist kept telling me to exercise less. And I would nod in the office and go home and say, screw that shit.
right?
Because I knew I had to keep exercising in order to hang on to whatever strength that I could.
Right.
So, I ran. I couldn't run for very long. Then I walked. Then I swam and lifted weights. And then I couldn't swim anymore. I just did some very simple water aerobics. And then I just got down to doing very simple little mat exercises. So over time, what I could do kept getting smaller, smaller, and smaller, and smaller. But I did that every day. Yeah.
So like no matter what, you were always trying the exercise.
I always exercise every day. And my neurologist would say, you're making your exhaustion worse. You have to exercise less. So what I worked out was, and it took me a while to finally get this, that I would work out first thing in the morning. And if I worked out so hard that I couldn't go to work, I knew that was too much.
Right.
And of course, so I kept having to trim things back. So I would work out enough so I could still go to work and function in my reclined wheelchair, in my zero gravity chair. Because if I did work out too much, I couldn't even sit up in my zero gravity chair. That'd be flat out for about 36 hours.
Wow. So, but you kept going because you knew there was some benefit. Was that because if you exercised a little, it was better than not exercising, or was there research? Because I just find myself wondering, why are we as a medical system generally telling you do less and less and less, which in my mind prevents you from optimally detoxing. It hastens your decline. So
I figured I had to maintain my exercise capacity as long as I could.
Yeah.
And whatever limited walking I had was incredibly useful. My hands, incredibly useful. I wanted to be able to keep feeding myself. I wanted to go to the bathroom by myself. So that meant, I wanted to keep exercising so I could continue to be able to do those things. Now, by the summer of 2007, I was realizing that I was still working. The VA and the university were incredibly generous in redesigning my job multiple times. But it was really hard to walk around the house in the evening. And so I was like, okay, am I going to have to bring a scooter into my home? I had my tilt-recline wheelchair at work so I could work. And I'm like, okay. So that's where I'm at. And I can't sit up like I am now for more than 10 minutes. I'm having brain fog. My face pain is very difficult to manage. I'm on very high dose gabapentin. I'm going to a pain clinic frequently for injections and 5 days of Cytomedrol to get things turned off. And I'm like, I know the natural history of trigeminal neuralgia and the study of MS. is that it quits being episodic. It converts to continuously on.
All the time.
And I also know that with Dr. Kevorkian, the guy who assisted folks with suicide, the leading diagnosis for that was trigeminal neuralgia that had turned permanently on. Because, all of your sensory input gets transmuted into this intense electrical pains. And so
In your face, I mean.
In your face. So
constant.
You can't talk, you can't swallow, light, sound, a breeze on your face triggers all that. So, what I realized was, okay, if that happens, I simply have to decide that there's no feeding tube. Because when you get to the point where you cannot swallow, because it triggers pain and you're drooling, and that's what happened to me when it would turn on. I couldn't really talk, I couldn't really swallow, I'd drool. And so like, okay, well, so actually I found that comforting, like, okay, that still gave me a sense of that I still have control.
Right.
Unfortunately, that summer I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine, and I took their course in neuroprotection. I had a longer list of supplements, which I happily added. Not a lot happened, but then had this, and you'll appreciate this, had this really big aha. Like, what if I redesign my diet based on all the basic science I've been reading?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been following the paleo diet, very meticulously, but I wanted to figure out where these nutrients were in the food supply. So I redesigned my diet in a very, very specific way, continued with my supplements. I also went back to my daily meditation. And I was working closely with physical therapy on my tiny little workout that I was doing. We
Right.
added electrical stimulation of muscles to that, because that's sort of an athletic rehab tool.
Mm-hmm.
And the results were actually quite stunning, Tom. It was just stunning, because it was December 25th that I had this very structured paleo diet. And within 3 months, my pain is gone. My fatigue is remarkably gone. My brain fog is gone. And I'm sitting up again at the table.
3 months.
In 3 months. 3 months. And at about the 4th month, I start walking around the hospital with my walking sticks. And people are like, "Oh my God, Dr. Wahls."
I was going to say, like, if I saw you in the hallway, I'd be like, "What the hell did you do?"
Yeah. And so they're all thinking like I'm on Tysabri. And I'm like, no. Well, this is just, nothing new has changed drug-wise. I'm just, changed my diet.
It must be that Wahls Protocol.
And then my chair of medicine, when I over at the university, I went over to see him, and he was so impressed when I walked in. And he too thought, it's like, this must be those new biologics. I said, no.
They didn't work.
He said, "Terry, this is so important. Get a case report written up." So we did that, and then he called me back and said, "And now you're going to do a safety and feasibility study." And I said, "Well, I don't know how to do those things. That's not the research that I do. I do this diagnostic area." He said, "I'll get you the mentors. This is your assignment. This is what you're going to do." So I salute, like, okay. So he got me the mentors, and actually we did that little study. And said, the research question you have is, can other people implement what you did? Because clearly what you've done is a very complicated regimen.
It's so inspiring, though, that they would even see that and not just poo-poo it. Like, to go, here's a respected colleague who changed all of this. We saw the decline. You reversed it. So that's one thing. But then to dive in and support you and essentially mandate you get this out in the world, that's pretty amazing.
I give a huge amount of credit. Paul Rothman was the chair of medicine, so he saw the amazing recovery. The other thing that's very helpful is I was on the institutional review board, who also saw the decline and the amazing recovery. Mm-hmm. Because of this, you probably could not have gotten this through any other IRB, because we really had a hard time getting through that one, as it turned out, because the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee said there's no safety data other than Wahls. This is too dangerous.
On food and
Well,
supplement.
because food supplements, because it was a complicated supplement regimen,
Right.
in the E-STEM, it said, people won't do it, it's too complicated. But we did get it all worked out. I had a bunch of, I had to have exclusionary criteria who I would not let in, the safety labs, to make sure that we monitored everything correctly. And as it turned out, people did have some serious side effects. If they're overweight, they lost weight actually quite rapidly and got back to a healthy body weight. So I ended up having to do these safety reports every 3 months on the weight loss that people were having and their stabilization. And I got to do the first 10, and then I had to do a safety report to the IRB. Then I could recruit the second 10. So because the first 10 didn't really take the supplements, we greatly reduced and simplified the supplement regimen. Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting. The IRB, when the IRB approved my study, they were very precise that we had to do what I had done.
Like,
so
exactly.
Yeah. And the question was, will people do what you did, Terry? And if they do you hurt them? So that's the safety part. And then feasibility, will they actually do it?
Right.
And then the secondary question is, what happens, what the effect size is. And so no, and all I had to show was that there was a trend in the right direction for the fatigue scale. And what we had was a dramatic improvement in energy and reduction in fatigue that we saw actually very quickly within 12 weeks. And it continued to improve over the next 9 months with a p-value of less than 0.0008.
Wow.
So that's really quite significant. And again, remember, the IRB had said, all I had to show was a trend, because it's this tiny little pilot study.
Right, to see if we should look deeper.
If we should look deeper. So we've done 3 studies. They've all been published, favorable results. The 4th study, we're doing the data analysis now. And that one was a much bigger study funded by the MS Society, where we're comparing a low-fat diet, the SWANK diet, and the Wahls diet. And depending on when we get our data analysis complete, I may be able to present that at the fall International MS meeting in Washington, D.C., assuming that by September we get to have meetings where
we can actually meet.
Where thousands of people will all meet. So
right. So are you able to give us like a glimpse into what you're seeing, or is that still under wraps at the moment?
Yep. I have no idea. Well, even if I knew, I could tell you guys, because then I wouldn't be able to present it. Can't let the cat out of the bag. And then the other thing that, and this is part of the conflict of interest management plan, is the statistician is analyzing the data blinded, so they don't know diet 1, diet 2, which one is which. And so when that analysis is complete, the process usually goes this way. It'll go back to the final report to the MS Society. The Data Safety Monitoring Board will make whatever recommendations they have with any tweaks to the data analysis. And ultimately, I will get to see the data. I don't quite know how soon that will be.
Right.
Soon, because we'd like to submit our a late-breaking abstract to the MSB. But and if we can't hit that deadline, then we'll just do it for the spring meeting.
Right. Well, I mean, that's awesome. I mean, to be so rigorous. I mean, so many people are like, hey, I'm just going to hey, this changed me. So, and I did it in 3 patients. And so let's write a book and let's do all this. And the amount of effort that goes into the scientific rigor of what you put into the Wahls protocol is astounding to me.
And if we're going to change the standard of care for how we treat MS, for how we treat autoimmunity, then this is what's required. If I'm going to help usher in an epidemic of health, this is what's required.
That's what you do, yeah.
Unfortunately, that was so much age that Paul Rothman sat me down and said, Terry, this is what you should do. And so I've happily headed down that path.
Well, I think that's what we need to do. Not only do we need to help people, but we need to change the way the entire system does, because like you and I as an individual can help so many people. If you write a book, you can help so many more. But if you can change the way the medical system views MS and they can incorporate this, now you're going to change, you can change the whole system.
And that's already happening. What is so exciting, Tom, when I look at when I started doing my dietary intervention studies, I was the only one doing a prospective food-based dietary intervention study, and that one was a comprehensive, multimodal intervention: diet, stress reduction, exercise, targeted supplements, and it was extremely difficult to get approved, and no one else was doing it on clinicaltrials.gov. So that's 2009 when we started all of that. In 2010, when I finally was able to start recruiting. Now in 2020, as a result of my multiple trials, as a result of my TEDx talk, and my books and the public pressure and my influence on the research, now in fact, there are many dietary intervention studies going on. I think there have been 15, 13 that are active. And I am involved either as the PI or a member of the study team in 5 of those studies. So, full.
All of these for MS, or?
Those are just for MS. And we have dramatically increased the food-based dietary intervention studies for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, and we've dramatically increased the interest in this multimodal intervention. With the main outcome is change in quality of life as the main outcome. And then secondary outcomes are the mechanistic things that happen with the microbiome or the metabolome or other biomarkers. So I've changed the way research is being done.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I think it's so, like, usually when you read research, you're like, primary outcome is like some number or some digit, like some way that we've taken the human's experience of being alive and reduced it to some sort of blood marker, as opposed to putting the individual and their quality of life as the primary endpoint.
Yeah, and I think fatigue is perhaps one of the most exquisite measures of efficacy of the intervention for MS, for any systemic autoimmune disease. And then overall quality of life responds a little bit later. And then a few months after that, you may begin to see changes in motor function. One of the biomarkers that I'm working with a collaborator on is we like to measure gene expression changes in some of our stored specimens. Because what I think probably happens is, on a biochemical basis, the diet and lifestyle program that we've created is changing gene expression. It's also changing your microbiome, which changes the various metabolites that come through, which then in your brain lowers your microglia activation, so there's less inflammation in your brain, and my fatigue diminishes, and my anxiety and my depression diminishes. And then in a few more months, my quality of life is beginning to improve. And then, depending on the person, the speed of recovery, earlier in disease, this will be a little faster, but my motor strength will begin to improve.
Right. But it sounds like what's important, I think, for everyone to understand is that there's certain things we would expect to change sooner, and then as we continue to move forward, something else will change and something else. But it's a journey, and the sooner you get, and this is, I'm always saying, like, the early diagnosis, early intervention is critical. One of the things I think we can learn from your work, Terry, is that I don't think, and correct me, let me know what you think about it, but I think that you can implement the fundamental pieces of the Wahls Protocol before you're sick. So this
Oh my
isn't
God,
just,
yeah.
it's not a diet for people who are sick. It's, yes, it's an intervention, but that's the piece. You know, we should be doing this ahead of time.
I'm trying to convey to everyone that this is all about healthy aging, living with vitality, that far too many members of our society think that our fatigue, our need for caffeine, energy shots to get through my day's work is normal. That
Right.
I should begin to have a little difficulty with erectile dysfunction in my 30s because, I'm not a young man anymore. That I should lose interest in my honey in my mid 30s because, I'm just not 18 anymore.
Right.
That I should struggle to jog or walk in my early 40s. But none of that is true. We should be able to function well into our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And in fact, we should be able to function very well.
Yeah.
So I want health span. Health span is far more important than lifespan, and that most of us want to be able to have a physical life, an emotionally satisfying life, and want to still enjoy intimacy with our partners.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal is to live to 120, playing with my great grands and grandchildren and whatever kids I can find in the neighborhood that want to play soccer.
Right.
That would be my goal. Now, if I'm going to do that, and I want everyone to have that kind of goal. And if you're going to do that, then you want to be really doing all these diet and lifestyle factors that you and I are teaching the public.
Yeah, it's so inspiring because earlier it's like, man, Terry is such a badass, and I've known that since I read your book. I knew then when we met, but but it's like, guys, if you go to the gym with Dr. Terry Wahls, watch out, because I can work out pretty hard and pride myself because like you, Terry, 120, 130 sounds really good to me and full bore all the way, but it's like the thing is like. I just remember when we were at a conference in Arizona and, I meet up with you in the gym and you're like just rocking out, the blood flow restriction bands and doing things, but you're doing very targeted exercises that are really specific for what you need and taking that into account.
Correct. And we've talked a little bit about my years of suffering with the trigeminal neuralgia. And it's suffering, absolutely.
It's brutal.
But ironically enough, I now also realize that that's this profound gift. So I have this very exquisite biosensor that tells me the level of inflammation in my brain. Because if I'm doing a great job on my diet, lifestyle, self-care, I don't have any pain. But if I'm flying too much, so I have too much stress, if I'm sleep deprived, if I get exposed to gluten, my sensation on my face is a little off, and then the zingers start. And so this is, powerful motivation for me to like, what, I'll get up at 5 o'clock, or whenever I wake up. I'm happy to say I don't have to set an alarm. I get up, I meditate, I do my workouts, and today I did my e-stim workout. You can sort of see the device
in the back corner there. Yeah.
So I hook up to my device. I do my body weight strengthening exercises. Then I take my sauna. Then I take my cold shower. I do another round of meditation, and then I start my day. And
so you've done like all of this before you even start your day. Like really, that's your morning ritual.
That's my morning ritual, and then in the evening, I, again, will have another meditation. I may do an ice bath. I might do another round of e-stim. And I've learned to value sleep.
Hear to that.
So, and of course, I did quickly run into spending 2.5 hours a day on self-care, sometimes 3.5 hours a day. This was a transition that I slowly evolved into, but I realized that if I do that, I don't have any problem with face pain. If I let myself get too busy,
mm-hmm.
and start, working too hard on my research, my face pain turns on.
Well,
Like, okay.
as another person in medicine who wants to share all this kind of information with people and has a lot of projects going on at any one given time, the thing I'm amazed about is how efficient you are and how much you do get done. Yet we just talked about 2.5 to 3.5 hours of self-care per day. And most people, and even myself at times, I'm like, man, do I really have that kind of time? But I see that and as I've followed sort of you and gotten to know you better, like, I almost feel like the more at least externally, it looks like the more I hear you talk about spending the time on self-care and really the number has gotten close to 3 hours, it's like the more prolific you are. Like you're actually
Yeah.
doing more by
Well,
focusing on you.
and my chair of medicine, he and I were talking about that, and he's like, I can't believe you spend that amount of time. And I was like, Rich, what I've discovered is by spending that amount of time, I've been far more effective at the other times. Because
Yeah.
I'll tell you, when my pain is turned on, I can't do anything. That is time is gone, and it's gone for as long as it takes to get it turned off. And so, fortunately for me, the price of not having superb self-care is pretty steep. It's very steep.
And so many people listening, I mean, I'm sure that, there will be people who are like, right on, I get exactly what Dr. Wahls is saying. But Terry, the other part is I think that so many people are just kind of like, well, but see, that's for Terry and the people who have the MS and stuff. And like, I'm
Yeah.
always trying to find a way to get that message across that
Well,
you have a small barometer if you learn to pay attention to it and respect that before it becomes trigeminal neuralgia and MS.
correct. Correct. And the other thing that I work with people, and I'm teaching my practitioners how to do this, is that we create the big, hairy, audacious goal of what they want their health for.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a conversation after I've gone through their timeline. What are their likely most impactful lifestyle interventions that get their DNA to be better aligned with their behaviors so we can get that evolutionary alignment better? And then say, okay, let's make some small, smart goals to just begin getting things better aligned. Not big goals, because I need you to have something that you could actually be successful at this week.
Right.
So don't tell me you're going to work out an hour 3 days a week. That's too big a goal. So maybe the goal is you're just going to call physical therapy and see your physical therapist. That's a goal you should be able to achieve.
Right.
Or maybe the goal is you're going to go through your cupboard and get rid of all the junk food. So we start with helping them identify the big, hairy, audacious goal, and then having a conversation about what are the health behaviors that we're going to work on, and
So
what's the achievable next step.
yes, you're taking concrete action steps so that you can start to see results. Because earlier you're saying, I mean, you're talking about like if you do the Wahls Protocol, I mean, 3 months to out of a wheelchair is like
pretty fast.
I mean, that you don't hear, that is beyond fast. I mean, and maybe, I don't know, as a practitioner in chronic illness, I've seen people suffer for, well over a decade. I'm like, anytime anybody sees anything that they would call even remotely like dramatic in 3 months is amazing. So this is like next level, like mind blown. Yeah, that's a great word, extraordinary.
And what I tell people is, when you're dealing with someone with a chronic progressive illness, whether it's MS or rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, where the course is typically steadily downhill. And mind you, people will gladly pay $100,000 a year or more for drugs to try and hold the course and prevent future damage. So if the diet and lifestyle program that I teach you prevents future damage, so all we do is just stop the decline, in my research, that would have been like a phenomenal success. That would have been extraordinary. And the fact that half of our folks had remarkable clinical improvement in motor function. It's just stunning.
It's incredible.
And half did continue to decline. So true, we couldn't help everyone, but to have helped anyone with progressive MS is astounding.
It's mind-boggling, and I mean, like, when you're talking numbers of 50%, I mean, some drug trials can't achieve that, right? And I mean,
Yeah,
obviously they didn't for you.
Right, Impura is a drug that's given to help people walking. And I believe it got FDA approval because they were able to help modestly 38%. But remember, with progressive MS is a progressive disease, so
there's no hope.
Helping anyone improve even modestly at 38% was still, people were very, very excited about that.
I would be too if I had no hope, but it's like what I'm hearing is that if I can incorporate the principles you teach, I can actually improve less risk of meds and improve my quality of life, at least potentially.
And so, there's a debate, do you take drugs or do the Wahls Protocol? This doesn't have to be an either or. I think it's a clinical decision, depending on the disability that you have right now, the indicators of poor prognosis, number of lesions you have, number of relapses. Drugs might be appropriate from the beginning, or you can wait 3 months, do diet and lifestyle, and then make a decision. But everyone should do diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
Our leading neuroscientists are now saying drugs alone will not be enough. Drugs alone, you'll still have more rapid brain volume loss, higher rates of cognitive decline. So everyone should improve diet quality, add stress reduction, add exercise, don't smoke. It's like they finally have read the book.
Right. Well, it's on how the body works.
Yeah. No. This book. Right?
Well, it's funny. I was going to say, I mean, there's so many cool things to talk about. And I mean, I was just thinking on, like, I want to make sure we segue and talk about all the updates, because there's a couple of things I have questions about. But one thing that just struck me was, even if you feel like medications are something that you want to pursue, or that maybe your condition is so severe, maybe you need to pursue.
Oh, yeah.
I feel that anybody who sits down and goes, the more resilient you are going in, the better your result is. And to me, it's almost like if I need meds, I want to do the Wahls Protocol for 3 months and then add the meds on top. If I need to, I may find out I don't, but at least I give the drug a better chance to help my body, because I've given my body a chance to have the nutrients it needs.
Now, it's interesting. So the neurology folks in the MS clinic here at the university, they, of course, would prefer people to go on drugs because that's the standard of care. But if somebody comes in and says, look, I really want to do diet and lifestyle, I want to wait and see if I could do this without drugs. They're like, okay, that's fine, but you have to do the Wahls at least 110%. There's no cheating.
Nice.
And then they just see them every 3 months. And as long as they're doing well, no relapses, no new lesions on the MRI, then they just follow them frequently. And they see that, some folks do very, very well.
Right. It's awesome that they're so open to it. So the cat's out of the bag. Definitely, we've got the new book. We've got revised and updated.
Here it is.
Yep. I'm looking at it right on my screen here. Too. Okay. And one of the things that I'm always trying to empower people to understand that they have a lot more control over their health outcomes and the way their life goes than maybe we've been taught by the conventional system and our conventional upbringing. And a lot of people are afraid, they don't like the fatigue. A lot of people are afraid of Alzheimer's and dementia. And so I know that you really pulled out a piece on the ApoE4 risk mitigation. So where's that all coming in? Because I know it's important in MS, but it's also dementia and Alzheimer's is a big piece.
It's really big. It's very cool. The ApoE4 community reached out to me because they discovered my work and have implemented it and found it to be very, very helpful with improving their energy, their quality of life, their cognition. I've met with them and met 90-year-olds who are ApoE4 homozygous, still playing chess, still traveling the world to come to events that I'm speaking at. So I've spent a lot more time reading and thinking about Alzheimer's and cognitive decline as a result of my collaborations with the ApoE4 community.
So for anyone who doesn't know, can you fill us in a little bit on what
Yeah.
ApoE4 is?
So this is a genetic marker that if you have the ApoE2 gene, you're at lower risk for Alzheimer's. The ApoE3 gene, 2 copies, you're at average risk. If you have 1 copy of ApoE4, then you're about 4 times the risk. If you have 2 copies, then you're about 20 times the risk. So dramatically higher risk of Alzheimer's cognitive decline. And what we now have, and the research continues to grow, that this is Alzheimer's as a disease category, and then even ApoE4 is very amenable to diet and lifestyle risk mitigation. So this is all about diet quality, stress reduction, exercise, reducing toxin exposure, the kinds of concepts that I teach, getting rid of the food items to which you may have unrecognized sensitivity, such as gluten, dairy, eggs, eating a more nutrient-dense diet. If you're ApoE4, I don't want you to have saturated fat, but I put you more on the olive oil program. And then I want you to follow your lipids very closely and follow your blood sugar very closely to be sure those 2 areas are very well controlled.
So you're making modifications of the Wahls protocol based upon some of the emerging research in the genetics.
Yes.
And it's more individualized at that point.
Much more individualized, and I talk a lot about the benefits of fasting, of ketosis. But what a lot of people, and I didn't realize this either, the high-fat diet that is used for the ketogenic diet it's only been around about 100 years. For the vast majority of time, our ancestral mothers and fathers, if we went back, 250,000 years ago, when we're first were Homo sapiens, we were long-distance hunters.
Mm-hmm.
The boys in the clan would run down the prey, 2 to 8 hours, 24 hours of tracking and harassing the prey. Then they kill them, carry them, bring them back. Then the mothers of the clan would prepare the food. They also would have been doing some intense physical activity with their own version of hunting, gathering, and watching the kids.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in ketosis by virtue of physical activity.
This is what people forget.
Occasionally we'd be in ketosis because we were starving. There was no
Right.
food, and we were in ketosis because we're burning our own fat. We were never in ketosis because we were eating that much fat day after day after day. If we had a particularly good hunt, and you happen to get a fat animal in the fall, then you might have a fattier meal, but it wouldn't be just pure fat. It wouldn't be the 9% fat. That's a very new phenomenon. And so for clinical, there are certainly clinical indications where that high-fat diet does make a lot of sense. But historically, from an evolutionary standpoint, we're in ketosis because of exercise or there was no food.
Mm-hmm.
And the ketogenic diets that people are talking about are very new, artificial. And so I think they can be extremely helpful for specific clinical indications. And so yes, I'm very fond of ketogenic eating, but I'm less inclined to recommend a medium chain triglyceride high fat diet for everyone. I would do it for certain clinical indications. I want to follow up the lipids to know that they're safe. I would probably pair the olive oil ketogenic eating pattern with time restricted feeding or a periodic fast.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the person is an endurance athlete, with intermittent endurance athletics.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed that because I've been known to do things like long distance running and obscenely long distance cycling at at high rates of speed. And, one of the things I noticed is that if I would do these long rides, and if I went into them sort of more in a higher, not high, but higher fat, lower carb state, and then just put in some of the specific carbohydrates that would help me just get through the whole thing, my performance is dramatically different. So I would tweak. Yeah. But it was crazy. I remember one time I was going out with this group of guys, many of whom were semi-professional cyclists and just happened to be friends of mine. So I got, to go along. And one night I ate dinner a little earlier than usual. So then I'm like, oh, I'll carb load late at night, and like I used to do in high school running, and the next day my performance is terrible. And 2 weeks later I go out and I just say, you know what, I'm going to have my regular dinner, my regular breakfast. I'm going to stick with the principles I know that work. And I was able to ride with them just fine. So 2 weeks difference. Yeah. And just like, this change in my diet, and it almost doesn't matter what it was. It was like I knew for my body it probably wasn't right, but I just kind of haphazard tried it, and it miserably failed. So I think that So for the people who are here, so if we have an E3, which is thankful, I mean, I guess maybe thankfully what I have, at least I don't have a higher risk.
Well, you still don't want to have Alzheimer's, so
no, I don't want.
I want you to still take care of yourself there, Tom.
No, yeah. No, I'm definitely about that, Terry. I guess what I mean is I may be to have a little bit more saturated fat than sort of the ApoE4 people, but at the same time, I don't want to go over the top.
Correct. I think following lipids makes a lot of sense to know how you're tolerating your current diet and making adjustments accordingly.
What are you looking for? What are you looking for, though? Because there's so much like, 130, blah, blah, blah,
So
100 LDL.
Is, you need to have enough cholesterol to make your testosterone and your vitamin D and your cortisol, because we want everyone to be happy in your home. So in general, I prefer a cholesterol between 200 and 250. Total. I think that's total cholesterol. And then you can decide if you want to get fancy into particle size and all of that. If your cholesterol's over 250 to 300, I'm uneasy. If it's over 300, I'm really
gonna work on that.
And the fats that you're consuming are not good for you. And so we'd really want to shift your eating pattern. Right. If you have diabetes or heart disease or you've had a stroke, then I would tolerate having a lower cholesterol. And if the person emotionally is, very fat phobic, and they want to have a lower cholesterol, I'll have some negotiation with them over what is the cholesterol target that they are comfortable with.
Right. But the key here is that the cholesterol is not like necessarily bad, and it actually has some functions for immune function and anti-inflammatory, and like you said, hormones.
And anti-infection. It's important to protect us against infection. It's important for producing myelin. So and we look at it. I just updated my review of the nutrients that, again, in animal models or human studies, have been associated with remyelination, and cholesterol is one of them. And cholesterol in your diet does not increase the risk of relapse. So,
has anyone looked at, because like to me, I'm immediately, the first thing my doctor brain goes to is, I know that everybody with MS, people are going to be extra worried about cardiovascular disease. So they're going to, in a conventional model, I would be trained to bring their cholesterol even lower, low fat, making it a low LDL, below 70, and all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Has anyone looked at like the cholesterol level and MS outcomes?
So those are some of the outcomes that we will be reporting. So
I can't wait.
At some point, I'll be able to talk about that more specifically than I can now, but not
all right
yet.
So somebody's looking at it, though. That's good.
We are looking at it.
Awesome. Well, I mean, anything else that's really jumping out? Because I'm recommending everybody go and check your revised protocol out.
Let's get this. And then if people are practitioners, Yeah, I think they should think about coming and working with us, getting trained. We have a practitioner program to teach people these concepts because what I've done that I think is unique is we have evolutionary biology, ancestral health, functional medicine, behavioral psychology, the science of behavior change, in this 15-step Wahls behavior change model that we use in our clinical trials, in my clinical practice, uh, because we have extraordinary levels of adherence. In my clinical trials, we've had 90% adherence to these very complicated regimens.
90%?
90% dietary adherence. Isn't that astounding?
If you're, yeah, I mean, if you're a practitioner, you got to hop on learning how to do this because, like, seriously, if I could have 90% of people pay attention to what I'm asking them to do, talk about changing the world, Terry.
I mean, and the reason your people don't get better, or my people don't get better in clinic, has to do not with that you and I ordered the wrong test or told them to do the wrong supplement. It's whether or not we can get the person willing to make these big diet and lifestyle changes and to be successful at it. And that's one of the big things that we teach. And the other thing that I teach, you know, I love A4M, I love IFM, they teach great stuff, but they have such an intensive teaching for advanced testing, complicated botanical regimens. The people I took care of in the VA live on food stamps, don't have money. I couldn't do fancy testing. I could do very basic supplements, but what I could do was, you know, evolutionary biology, health behaviors, motivational, creating the desire for change. And so I learned how to do all those things and teach people how we can do these functional medicine concepts if you're in a practice environment where your toolbox doesn't let you do these comprehensive testing, and your patients don't have the money for comprehensive testing, or they may not have the money for these complex botanicals. But we still have remarkable transformations.
Right. And it's so inspiring to me, Terry, because, you know, that is one of the things, like, you go to a lot of these conferences, you learn all this fancy information, and then you go back in on Monday and you're like, I either just got sort of like a lot of cool science and I don't know what to do with it, or it's so over the top that where do I start with the person who actually is walking into my office today, who's a real person? And we all know that it doesn't matter how, I mean, you said it so well, it doesn't matter how complicated the protocol is and how good it is. If we can't get them to do the protocol, whether it's 1 pill or 6 pills and 10 lifestyle changes, if we can't get them to buy into their own health, they're not going to be getting better.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
Awesome. Dr. Terry Wahls, it's amazing to talk to you again. I feel so grateful to be able to call you a friend and a colleague. And I mean, I'm so blessed to know you, and I'm always inspired, as are my family. And
two more things I should pitch. I realize people should know that we're recruiting for our next clinical trial people newly diagnosed with MS, newly diagnosed with clinically isolated syndrome. Reach out to our study team at ms.study@healthcare.uio.edu. I'll get you those links, Tom.
Yep, and I'll make sure I provide them so everybody can just click right on them and go over to there.
And if you want a one-page handout for our diet, that's terrywahls.com/diet. That'll give you a one-page summary to get started. And practitioners, come check out my website, certification program. Would love to get you trained.
Yeah, I'm working on that part too, you know, because it's so important to dive in and be able to learn from someone. You know, the thing is, like, you're not just somebody who discovered some fancy science. It's like you're a patient who went through this and you know what it feels like, and you were able to create something from the ground up, from the inside out. And to me, that's healing happens from the inside out. And you created this whole thing for you, and now you're sharing it with the world. And I mean, I just really appreciate you making the time to share it with us. And I want to make sure that we'll get all that information out to everybody. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so cool. How often does somebody invite you to be part of what they're doing? And like, say, here, practitioners, come join me. Patients, I've got a spot for you because I want to help change your life. And I want you to be able to help change other people with MS's
Yeah.
lives as well by being part of the mission. So
Absolutely.
thanks so much, Dr. Terry Wahls, and I'm sure we'll do this again real soon.
Love you, Tom.
Love you too, Terry. Talk soon.